Good afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon, and it's around, let's see, 7:40 p.m. I'm still in my office because the Loku Inquest wraps up tomorrow, and we need to come up with tangible recommendations that address a whole number of issues so that people, particularly black people and persons of color, do not get killed by the police. Do not get killed by the police. So obviously the entities to whom the jurors' recommendations have to go to are the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Toronto Police Services Board, Toronto Police Service, Special Investigations Unit, and the Anti-Racism Secretariat of the Ministry of Citizenship, I think it falls under. So that's the Government of Ontario. Then there's the Canadian Mental Health Association that leases these buildings that houses persons with mental health issues. Sometimes they're assisted living, where there's a lot of resources to assist the person, and there's some units that are independent living. And then there's across boundaries that have programs for persons, particularly visible minorities, who have mental health exceptionalities. I mean, the problem, quite frankly, with Loku Inquest is there's a risk that inquest may be whitewashed because the coroner doesn't want to hear a word about anti-black racism or racial profiling. And he said that very directly, that in his world, he sees no evidence of even implicit bias. And implicit bias is something that is so subconscious, almost like it's deeper than subconscious discrimination. And this coroner says, well, I see no evidence of even implicit bias in this case. So it is indicative that he will discourage the jury from considering anything to do with racism. And so we've got to be on the alert for that. We've got to let them know. We've got to let them know what's up. We've got to let them know that race is the elephant in the room in the Loku Inquest, and that we want recommendations that actually address the intersectionality between mental health and addictions, because persons who suffer mental health issues sometimes have a propensity as well to use, whether it's soft drugs or hard drugs. So we say mental health and addictions and race, particularly anti-black racism, implicit and unconscious bias, and in terms of how the police operate de-escalation, right? I mean, the goal after all should be zero deaths at the hands of the police. That's a goal that's not necessarily attainable, because there will be some cases where the police has to use lethal force, but we want those cases where the police use lethal force to be minimal. We had an expert that testified, Dr. McKenzie, and Dr. McKenzie feels that statistics is a great benchmark to sort of measure what the police are doing and how they're doing it, and whether what they're doing have any positive results. So in terms of how the police use force, at the moment there's no statistics that show you the race of the persons who police use force on, the race of the persons who died in police custody. So more often than not, the numbers come from self-identification or people who have knowledge of the person who has died. And so it's local community organizations who keep track of the number of blacks and other racial minorities who were killed in custody by the police. So we want that to change. We want the police to have, under use of force form, biodata information or demographic information, on the race, the gender, ethnicity, place of origin, and so on, of the person who was seriously injured or killed, including, if possible, the person's place of origin. So that's, every year the police have to go through a recertification process. So every year they have to be able to pass the PARS exam, which shows how fast they can run. They have to be able to run, they have to be able to carry a certain weight, and they have to be able to shoot. So we want included in that yearly certification, we want them also to be certified that they're capable of dealing with persons who suffer from mental illness and persons of the various multicultural, multi-ethnic dynamic that makes up the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario, because the officer that was involved in the Loku Inquest, Officer Dahl, who shot and killed Andrew Loku, he says, look, I had no experience dealing with black men. So if you don't have experience dealing with black men, and there's something called implicit bias, and implicit bias is part of the fabric of all human beings, then obviously any sort of stereotypical notions that you have will play itself out when you're dealing with a black man, especially a black man in crisis, where you have to make split-second decisions. And your split-second decisions will be split-second decisions that will assess the person to be much more dangerous than the person is. And because you assess the person to be much dangerous than he or she really is, then it's almost like, it's not almost like, it is the case where you will resort to the ultimate of lethal force, which has catastrophic consequences for that person's family and friends, because obviously he or she's dead, so they feel no pain, but their family have to live with it, and the community have to live with it. So we spent the entire weekend. The entire weekend was spent trying to trash out how these recommendations that are going to the jury will be crafted. So it's been quite a hectic weekend, and the emails came fast and furious. And so between Friday and today, I've received hundreds of emails in respect to the local matter. This week alone, I've received, the discussion has generated over 600 emails with various discussions among counsel. We trying to horse trade and figure out the best sort of recommendations that we all can agree to, so that the jury isn't overwhelmed with recommendations. So that's how the weekend has been. And so we're hoping that people come out tomorrow, because certainly if the black community shows up in their numbers, then this coroner, Dr. John Carla, who feels that race has nothing to do with the killing of a black man with mental illness, he's not going to be able to whitewash this inquest, because that's exactly what the approach that he's taking. He's taking a colorblind approach, or a approach that sort of want to whitewash this inquest. And so we don't particularly like that, and we would like them to know that the black community is engaged. We can't do that on the streets alone. We have to do it in the courtroom, where the people that are making the decisions are. And so if you don't show up, if you don't show up to the closing arguments, there's just me in the room. I'm the only black lawyer in the room. And quite frankly, I don't have the power. I don't have the power where I'm in the minority. So you don't show up, it shows that, well, I shouldn't say it shows, but it doesn't indicate that we're really engaged with the issues. And so the coroner is able to whitewash the stuff, because he doesn't see, he already doesn't see race, and then all it's dismissed as is a few busybodies, and so doesn't really get us very far. So people have to show up. People have to show up to support us. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far with this inquest. So I hope people recognize that and will show up to support us. Otherwise we're really going to be in trouble in terms of what happens with this case. So I hope we have people support us. We're going to put forward recommendations that will deal with things from an anti-racist perspective, and because we're going to put forward recommendations that deal with things from an anti-racist perspective, it means that we will get a lot of pushback. And so we need help. We need people to show up, and that your voice be counted, And if you show up and let your voice be counted, maybe the jurors will be attentive to the issues that maybe the jurors will be attentive in terms of how they deal with our issues. When I say our issues that affect African Canadians. I mean, we certainly are the brunt of police use of force, and so we have to be alive to that. You know, we have to be alive to that, and we have to certainly put forward strong recommendations. And I just updated my my written script on the inquest, and so this is what I thought. I said overall, the Loku Inquest proceedings went well, and we were able to call the appropriate experts to provide evidence that delved into uncomfortable topics such as implicit bias, racism, disability, and specifically the intersectionality of it, or of them. We heard from a total of 28 witnesses who brought important perspective that provides the jury with a wealth of information to use in crafting recommendations. My only qualm throughout the inquest was the ruling, or the repugnant ruling by the coroner around the use of the word racism. It was repugnant and unpalatable. I was pleased that he clarified his ruling and permitted counsel and the witness to ask and answer questions unencumbered by the uncomfortable ruling, right? Because what he was saying is that, hey, I don't want Dr. McKenzie, Dr. Qualm McKenzie, who's an expert in institutionalized racism, to use the word racism, right? He doesn't want Dr. McKenzie to use the word institutionalized racism. What kind of nonsense is that? And then he wants everywhere Dr. McKenzie used racism, Dr. McKenzie was supposed to omit that word. Minute, and that was certainly sorry, I think my video is going through some problems right now, but anyway, we were able to get the evidence in on institutionalized racism. But I mean, these cases such as Andrew Loku case brings racism to the front burner, and we can't have people telling us that we can't say the word, we can't call racism for what it is. I mean, we call racism for what it is. And Dr. Carla could be as mad as he like. You know, racism is a fact of life in our society, and racism is a reason why black people are dying, whether it's in Toronto, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Ferguson. I mean, in Missouri recently, St. Louis actually, a black police officer who was off duty and came out to assist in an incident got killed. Got killed by a fellow police officer who didn't recognize him as a police officer. Now he's a police officer that probably felt that, he was out of the woods. He was safe because the blue line would protect him, and the blue line did not protect that officer. He went out there thinking he would have been okay. And it's not the bad guys that killed him, it's what they call the good guys. The good guys the good guys killed one of their own because, he was a different race. He was black. And he was probably stereotyped as somebody up to no good, stereotyped as somebody who was dangerous, stereotyped as somebody who needed to have lethal force to deal with him. And I mean, that's the same thing that happened to Andrew Loku. Andrew Loku was killed in less than 22 seconds, right? Less than 22 seconds after the police officer's presence were announced, Andrew Loku was dead. Well, think about it. 22 seconds you barely have time to even think. Which means that the police officer went there, his gun drawn, and as long as Andrew Loku had that hammer in his hands, Andrew Loku was going to get that death sentence. And his evidence was that Andrew Loku's hands were up. But Andrew Loku had a black bag in one hand and a hammer in the other. If both of Andrew Loku's hands were up, it's more likely than not he was surrendering when he was killed, if one believes the officer's evidence. He said Andrew Loku raised the hammer at him to charge at him. Andrew Loku couldn't even walk straight that night. Andrew Loku was bouncing into walls. That's what we saw in the video, which means that Andrew Loku could not have gotten to that officer in quick speed if indeed he was inclined, which I don't believe, to charge at the officers. Difficult situation, but we're doing our best, and we will try to come forward with some very strong recommendations. But we have to take a stand. If we don't take a stand, then people in crisis, more particularly black people and brown people, will be killed by the police. It's the same with Sami Yatin. Right? Sami Yatin is on a streetcar. No one else is on the streetcar with him. He's alone. And yet the officer Forcillo felt the need to shoot and kill Sami Yatin. Right? And then to add insult to injury, not only do they kill him, but they also taser him. Hey, Rocco.
How are you?
Rocco, I'm live right now, and I'm live on my Facebook Live. So
When you finish that, give me a call and I'll come meet you and collect your passport and stuff.
Yeah, let me call you back in 30 seconds. I'm just gonna come off this live and call you back.
Okay.
Bye. So I gotta talk to another lawyer, so I'm gonna hop off this live, but I wanted to tell people what was going on with the Loku Inquest. And I think it's important for people to understand that where Batsy is concerned, we don't want the inquest to be a whitewash. And when I say that, I mean we don't want it to be colorblind. We don't want the issue of race to be ignored. Andrew Loku was a black man interacting with a white police officer who killed him in 22 seconds. I mean, some people may say, well, that is all part of the norm. But how many white men have been killed by the police with a hammer 22 seconds after police interacted with them? You know, the only other prominent case of that sort was a Chinese man named Edmund Yu, who was killed by the police in a streetcar after he had a hammer. And the police seem not to have learned anything from the Edmund Yu inquest, because, I mean, some of the recommendations from Edmund Yu were not even implemented, right? Some of the recommendations from Edmund Yu inquest were not even implemented. So, I mean, it's crazy, you know. And that's why, in respect to this inquest, I have serious issues, because I'm hoping that the work doesn't end in vain, but you know, I'm not thoroughly optimistic. You know, I'm not terribly optimistic that you know, that we will get these recommendations adopted and implemented, so that more lives are not lost. You know, that's the goal. Zero death. Right? Zero death is a goal, but very, 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 very difficult, given how things are going with even the coroner's mindset in this case, right? And I mean, you know, we'll see what the jury finds the cause of death of Andrew Loku is, but it's likely that the cause of death will be homicide. So stay tuned, and let's see what happens here. The interesting thing about Andrew Loku's case as well is Andrew Loku's family have not sued the police, so there's no civil action. There's no civil action against the police right now. And Andrew Loku's the limitation period is 2 years, so the limitation period ends next week. It ends on July 4th to sue the police. So there's no lawsuit against the police. So Andrew Loku has 5 young children. The youngest is 12 years old, and he was the provider. He used to do all kind of odd jobs in addition to his main job to get money to send home to Africa for his family. So for 2 years now, the family have not been able to rely on the financial support and other support that those children would have gotten from their father. So sad and tragic case, and hopefully, at least for the recommendations, we were able to do stuff that make sure that other people don't suffer the same fate. Anyway, time to go. Thank you for those of you who tuned in, and I appreciate it. Goodbye. Now let's see. I need to end this live, so let's see what I do. Am I still live? Oh boy, I'm still live. Let's see how I get out of this live. I need to end it.